Hi, my name is Jenny Lauren Dowden for Conduit News. Today, joining us in the studio is Brandon Carter. As many of you know, he is prosecuting attorney for Washington and Madison counties, and he will be on the ballot March 3rd. He's running for the Court of Appeals. Brandon, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me today.
The campaign season has been underway. I know March 3rd will be here so soon. And there are a lot of people out there who are curious about these nonpartisan races, such as yours. So I'm so glad that you're here. First, just tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience and what you're doing right now.
Certainly. I'll start at the end. I currently serve as prosecuting attorney here in Washington and Madison counties. The governor appointed me to that position in late 2024. I took office on January 1, 2025. I am positive that when I was appointed and it ran in the paper that most people went, "Who is that guy?" I've largely lived a public service life in the background, always as a prosecutor. I was a deputy prosecutor out of law school first for Robin Green, who now is a judge, and then Van Stone. Worked with Benton County for about 7 years and prosecuted all manner of offenses, from hot checks up to capital murder. In 2012, I went to work for the Department of Justice. So the bulk of my career has been as a federal prosecutor, prosecuting crimes against our country.
So where are you originally from?
Delaware County, Oklahoma, so right across the border. Yeah.
Went to law school where?
Here. That's what brought me over the border.
Okay, nice. And then what made you decide to go into law? Was there ever this moment in your life where you thought, this is exactly what I want to do?
No, not at all. The closest thing I can say I had to that was I went to a tiny little college in Chickasha, Oklahoma, and studied political science and took a constitutional law class. And the only conclusion I came to after that class was I don't want to go to law school. Went out into the world after graduating and worked for a very brief period of time as a state trooper in Oklahoma. And at some point during that, decided law school was the path I wanted to take. So I moved to Northwest Arkansas a weekend before 9/11 and started my journey to law school the following fall.
So with your time as prosecutor, you worked, as you mentioned, for the DOJ, and now you're kind of transitioning, I guess some might say, to the Court of Appeals. Why do you want to run for this specific position?
The Court of Appeals has largely been an anonymous court in our state court system. You're not going to ever get called for jury duty there. It's not the Supreme Court. You're not going to ever pay a traffic ticket there. It's the first stop after the circuit court for essentially quality control on circuit judges. We have circuit judges in this state who are activists and who are legislators. And this court is the check on that. And although we're elected regionally, they're statewide case assignments. So, a judge in Benton County could be a check on a out-of-control circuit judge in Pulaski County. So these judgeships are important. That court doesn't have on it somebody who's a career prosecutor. And when Judge Gladwin announced his retirement, and I looked at the stats from that court, a third of what they hear are criminal cases. In fact, the largest group of cases that court hears are criminal cases. It's about a third criminal cases. About 25% of their docket are Arkansas workforce cases or unemployment cases. And then the other 50% is what I just classify as everything else.
Yeah.
Small categories of a number of different things. It's not fair to say 50% of their docket is civil. 50% of their docket is everything else. Okay. The largest single category of things they hear are criminal cases. And that court could use somebody with a career in criminal justice on it.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned, I want to back up for a second. You mentioned that it kind of acts as a check on others, and also that we're seeing now, and I'm sure, you are acutely aware of this, and we're seeing nationally just activism. And I think that's also in the minds of voters when they are trying to determine who is the best candidate. And I think sometimes it may be hard for voters because they are, these races are nonpartisan. There are a lot of issues that you guys can't get into. So how do you win voters over and explain to them, why you're the best choice whenever they're, that's something hard to determine at times.
Yeah, judicial races are frustrating. They're frustrating for the voter because they go into these races really not knowing the things they'd normally know, like party affiliation. They're also frustrating for the candidate because there's so many things we can't talk about. Arkansas ethical rules for judges say that a judge has to be neutral and detached in all aspects of their existence, essentially, so that if an issue becomes an issue in their court, they can look at it as a neutral, detached magistrate, which is what you want in the judiciary. But we elect our judges in Arkansas. And because we elect our judges in Arkansas, people want to know the things they usually know when they go to the polls. And just because a judicial candidate is running on a nonpartisan ticket, that doesn't mean that they check their values at the door.
Right.
So really what you need to look at as a voter when you're deciding who to vote for is you look at the person. Is this a good person? Is this a person I trust making decisions in our society, decisions that may have far-reaching implications? And you do that by looking at their background and their experience and their views. And those are all things that are fair game, for voters.
Yeah. So when people want to look up your record or to learn more about that, and just hearing you talk about this in the case that you've handled, there's quite a distinction in your experience. And so where do you tell them to go? Do you say go to Court Connection? What do you say?
There are a lot of different places you could go, but the easiest advice I give to voters when they say, where can they research me, is Google me.
Yeah.
Google Brandon Carter, Arkansas. The Brandon Carter is a more common name than you think. So put the state on there as well. You will find 21 years of my history as a prosecutor and a litigator, from high-profile cases that I've worked on recently down to things that I handled very early in my career.
Yeah, I did that. So I Googled, although I was familiar with you, went ahead and did that. And the first few hits, of course, were the double homicide at Devil's Den. You were prosecuting that. And I know that you probably can't tell us a lot about that, but walk us through that case for our viewers. Of course, Washington County, right here in Devil's Den. And you are seeking the death penalty in that case. Just share what you can briefly, if you would.
I will. It will be brief because there's not a tremendous amount I could share on that case because there is a gag order in place. Andrew McGann is the defendant in that case. A lot of people don't know his name, but the Devil's Den case is how people identify it. He's charged with 2 counts of capital murder. He committed a murder in Devil's Den in the late summer of a husband and wife who were hiking on the trail. It is a case that, as prosecutor, I have decided to seek the death penalty on. And the reason for that is our law calls for it. Arkansas law provides that capital murder, for capital punishment to be present, a number of what they call aggravating factors need to be present. At least one aggravating factor needs to be present. And in the public record, the voter or the person that's just interested in litigation will find that I've alleged 3 aggravating factors in that case. And I believe it's an appropriate case for at least the jury to have the option as to what Mr. McGann's fate should be if he's found guilty. Of course, he's innocent until proven guilty. So at a trial down the road, the jury will be presented with 2 questions. First is he guilty of these 2 capital murders? The second then being the punishment question.
I'm sure that for a case of that magnitude and seeking the death penalty, do you ever have people come up to you or community or, have a difficult time with that kind of end result as far as seeking the death penalty?
So I have tried a number of cases where the death penalty was sought by the state, all when I was a state deputy prosecutor with Benton County. I have one defendant who's currently on death row. And it's an interesting experience. I've gotten a death sentence, and when that happens in a courtroom, you don't really know how to feel as a prosecutor. It's maybe the oddest feeling that I've dealt with as a prosecutor. It is a very deliberate process that a jury goes through to decide whether somebody should face the ultimate punishment for their crimes. And it's one that has a lot of safeguards built into it, and rightfully so when you're dealing with that kind of punishment. But I have people come to me in the community on both sides, that absolutely want people who have committed a heinous act to face the death penalty every time, eye for an eye. And I have had people on the McGahn case even who have approached me and said, this is, I can't understand how anybody would ever, pursue the death penalty in any case, for either philosophical, religious, or other reasons. And I will say this first, all of the people on both sides of those issues wouldn't be fit to be jurors in a death penalty case. You have to have an open mind and consider every side. So yes, people in the public do come up and visit about these cases.
Yeah. What else? What other memorable case comes to mind? I know that you also prosecuted was it Arkansas's largest meth bust? Is that right?
At the time it was. Yeah, at the time it was. So it's probably Arkansas's largest methamphetamine bust on a proactive law enforcement organization. So as a federal prosecutor, I was the lead task force attorney for our Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, which is the federal government, so we acronym everything. OCDET is what they called it. It's actually a program that's been eliminated here recently and turned into something else. So I was the lead task force attorney, and in that capacity, I led a group of DEA, FBI, and local law enforcement agents in that we will proactively target drug trafficking organizations, not single people necessarily, but whole organizations to try to eradicate or at least do something about the methamphetamine distribution proactively, not just reacting if somebody's been arrested, do something on the front end. We use a number of tools federally to do this. The one that's probably the most common are wiretaps. And in listening to a telephone of a local drug dealer in Harrison, Arkansas, we learned that he was being supplied by a man named Jason Alvarez, who had a methamphetamine warehouse in all places, Alpena, Arkansas.
Nice.
Now, when we busted that warehouse, in, I believe it was 2017, we found about 150 pounds of methamphetamine that was in the process of being what we call reconstituted. If you think of like Kool-Aid or Tang, it comes in a compressed state and then you dump water on it. Methamphetamine can act similarly.
Okay.
The cartel in Mexico would send this methamphetamine up to Alpena, Arkansas in concealed compartments in vehicles and things like that. And then this Mr. Alvarez would reconstitute it into crystal meth. And when we were listening to his phone, we knew that that was going on right then. When we busted that house, we found more methamphetamine than we had ever seen before. And it was methamphetamine that wasn't just going to be in Arkansas. That was methamphetamine headed to Nebraska, Illinois, Iowa, all over kind of the upper Midwest.
You mentioned a second ago, you're talking about philosophical, leanings and that sort of thing. I always think it's fascinating to ask, as far as who, because I know you can't say a whole lot, which is what we talked about. But your favorite Supreme Court justice, United States Supreme Court justice, and why?
I've been asked this question before.
Okay.
Of the ones that are on the court currently, Clarence Thomas.
Okay.
So. Okay. Of all Supreme Court justices, Justice Scalia.
Yeah.
I am a textualist, the same as Justice Scalia was and Clarence Thomas is.
Yeah, for our viewers, what that means.
So I interpret the Constitution. Well, I don't interpret the Constitution. It is my job as a prosecutor and as a judge will be my job to look at the Constitution when challenged and do my very best to determine what the founders meant when they wrote it. You look at the actual text of the document itself. It is my belief, and I think the belief of textualists everywhere, that if our founders wanted to view the Constitution as an evolving document, they wouldn't have given us a way to amend it.
Yeah.
So I'm a textualist, and Justice Thomas and Justice Scalia are the most recent textualists that probably the average person knows about.
What is it about them in that capacity that you admire?
Their adherence to the law. They are judges in the strict sense of being a judge, in that they look at the law, they look at the pleadings, and in Justice Thomas's case, don't even ask questions of the litigants during oral arguments, and they make their determinations solely on the law. They are not activists. In our climate now, there are too many judges that have become activists. Judges have largely become political positions. That's one of the reasons I've decided to run for this.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you also about that. On a lot of your signs and mailers, it says that you're running for Court of Appeals, but then it says prosecutor, not politician. Why did you feel it was so important to add that?
Because it's true. Um, I've spent my entire career as a public servant, all as a prosecutor. I'm not a politician. I hope that this process of running for judge isn't turning me into one. And if it is turning me into one, I'm a lousy one. I want to do this on the Court of Appeals because I want to continue to serve. I've always seen myself as a servant. That's why I have worked in the public sector for my entire career. I just want to continue to serve. I do not look at this position as one that is political at all. In fact, you shouldn't be a legislator in it. You shouldn't be an activist in it. You need to be of the same vein as Justices Thomas and Scalia in interpreting our Arkansas law and, when appropriate, our United States Constitution. There's not a place on the court for politicians and politics. I won't be one, and I don't intend to use this position when elected to be a stepping stone to whatever comes next. This is what comes next for me.
You also have experience in the appellate court, and that I think sets you apart in some ways. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I'm the only person in my judicial race that has real experience practicing in appellate court. And that all comes from when I was a federal prosecutor. As a federal prosecutor, it is my job to essentially defend my work after I get a conviction at the district court level. So for the entire time I was a federal prosecutor, which spanned almost 13 years, I practiced extensively and regularly before the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, occasionally the Tenth Circuit Court of Appeals. And for context, if you're not familiar with the system, that's just one step under our United States Supreme Court. There was never a time when I was with the Department of Justice that I was not practicing appellate law. It was a regular part of my practice. And for a judge on the Court of Appeals, it's essential to have an understanding of an appellate practice if you're going to be hearing appeals.
Like you mentioned, you do have an opponent. There are two of you in this race for Court of Appeals. Your opponent has said about prosecutors that prosecutors are just hammers looking for a nail. What do you
She has.
give us your thoughts on that?
Anybody who thinks a prosecutor is just a hammer looking for a nail, I have two observations. One is they've never been a prosecutor, so they don't really understand what that job entails. But more fundamentally, I question whether they really understand what justice means. A prosecutor's job isn't just to get a conviction. It isn't just to put people in prison. It is to find the truth and to seek justice, which sounds eerily similar to what a judge does. As a prosecutor, justice can be a lot of different things. Oftentimes it's incarceration. That's the tool that our legislature has given us to combat crime. But, being a prosecutor also involves the decision as to what charges to file, whether to file charges at all. After we filed the charges, what's the correct disposition for those charges? Somebody that thinks a prosecutor is just a hammer looking for a nail clearly doesn't have an understanding of all of those concepts and the nuances of the job. And because of that, I question whether they really understand what justice is.
Well, let's make that distinction between your opponent when you're out on the campaign trail and voters say, why, Brandon, should we choose you over your opponent? What sets you apart? What is it that you tell them to make that clear distinction?
The first thing I tell voters when they ask that question, and I get asked that question a lot, especially the closer we get to the election, is my opponent's a politician and I'm not. That's the most clear distinction that I could draw here. I believe this is her third or fourth race for elective office. This is my first and likely only race for elective office.
Yeah.
Politicians don't belong on the bench. And I'll tell you, as it relates to my opponent, she's a former legislator. And I worry to a degree that it will be difficult for somebody who spent so much time in the legislature to take off their legislative hat when they're on the bench and not be a legislator or an activist from their job as a judge. Right now, my opponent sits as a district judge in Ozark. Now, that's the lowest level court in our state court system. It's not a court of record.
Okay.
There's not a court reporter there. There's not a jury box there. Those are workhorses of courts.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
the dockets are busy. The days are long. It is yeoman's work to be a district court judge, clerk, litigant, or lawyer.
Okay.
But you're operating with a net.
Yeah.
In district court for the most part. Anything out of district court can be appealed to circuit court. And because of that, most of the cases that are heard in district court are traffic offenses, low-level misdemeanors, small claims type items. It's an entry-level court. And you have to question, although there's a large volume of cases that go through it, are they really the kind of cases that prepare you to be on the Arkansas Court of Appeals? You know, my argument is that being a career litigator who has tried the kinds of cases that end up before the Court of Appeals and has spent extensive time litigating appeals, the kind of candidate that needs to be there.
Yeah. As we mentioned earlier, March 3rd will be here so soon. And I know that there are several events happening around Washington and Madison County for voters to come and get to know you. Your website, how do you want people to, can they get in contact with you? Your website, what do you say?
There are a number of ways to get in touch with me. Probably the easiest way this close to the election is to follow our Facebook and message me. That's the most easy way. Our website does have an email link. I do respond to emails when I get them, but it's not as instant as if you contact me through Facebook.
Okay.
There is a telephone number listed on my campaign materials that is my honest to goodness cell phone number. I will take your call if you want to call me and visit about any of the issues.
Okay. Before we let you go, is there anything that we haven't covered that you would want voters to know ahead of March 3rd?
Voters, particularly the kind of voters that I think probably follow your news service, need to know that these court positions on the Court of Appeals, these judge positions, have become more important than they ever were. You know, Act 975 of 2025, our last legislative session, gave the Court of Appeals original jurisdiction over constitutional challenges. So we had a problem in Arkansas, and the problem was if a group of litigants were unhappy with a law passed by the legislature, they would find an activist judge somewhere to sue in front of, get a ruling in their favor, and then begin the appeals process. That has changed. The Court of Appeals is now the court of original jurisdiction for any time a litigant is challenging something constitutional in Arkansas. So these judgeships, very quietly, became more important in this election than they ever have been before because of what our legislature did in the last election. So we need to make sure we're putting good people on those courts.
That's really good insight. Well, Brandon, we wish you all the best in this race and really appreciate you coming in to talk with Condit today.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate the time.